The Despicable Me movies have become quite despicable in recent years. It's crazy to think the genesis for Illumination as an animation studio falls on the release of the original Despicable Me movie, with how it's now become such a massive franchise in general. Yet, with the release of the fourth movie coming out this week, I figured I'd take a look back at the entire franchise as a whole to see how it stacks up over the past 14 years. So in this ranking, which I will include the Minions movies, I will get to see if the franchise has sizzled out, peaked at its inception, or still going strong. So come along, ladies and gentlemen, and join me for a monumental deep dive into the Despicable Me movies. The one that started it all. The movie that created arguably the most heinous early 2010s memes. This movie was truly one of a kind when I was younger, because I remember falling in love with the animation, the story, and of course, Vector. So going into this rewatch excited me because I could reminisce on old times. And you know what? I enjoyed every second of this movie again. It genuinely felt like such a fun film that I couldn't help but smile the entire time while rewatching it. Since it's been so long, I forgot the original movie consisted of Gru being evil for half of it, so it was a nice reminder of how much Gru grew as a person. Seeing him go from only wanting to steal the moon and be the greatest villain in the world to wanting to raise 3 little girls was very heartwarming to watch, especially because of the whole adoption aspect of things. Most films dealing with adoption show the horrors of what it must feel like to endure that type of life, and Despicable Me doesn't hold back with it either. The woman who watches over the adoption process at the center Margot, Agnes, and Edith stay at is just downright mean as hell.
Edith! What did you put on my desk?
A mud pie.
You're never gonna get adopted, Edith. You know that, don't you?
Yeah, I know.
Like, this shit had me cringing, man. Hurting my feelings. And watching them grow from being tools for Gru and his villainy to actually becoming a whole family was very sweet to watch. Especially now that I'm older and can appreciate the family dynamic more instead of just the entertainment side of things. But speaking of entertainment, this movie has plenty of it. The action is very dynamic and the style of animation just fits so well for what they were going for with this movie. The final action scene where Gru must get the girls back from Vector had me on the edge of my seat. And the scene where Gru steals the shrink ray device from Vector's house was also really fun and entertaining. The animation really stands out when you compare it to that of Pixar and Disney, and at the time back in 2010, it was a huge signifier that this animation studio was unique and not trying to copy either of those studios at the time. And it worked, because the film has such a distinct style that I could never compare it to other studios and what they were making at the time, with how they designed the world, its characters, and all that. Another thing I loved about the film was it's genuinely funny. Like, there are moments in this film that had me cackling because of the line delivery and what was said or done.
No. Stay away from there, it's fragile. Well, I suppose the plan will work with 2.
And as for the Minions, which have easily become the wrong thing to become popular of this franchise, this film definitely used them a proper amount where it wasn't annoying and it was actually pretty comical. There were some moments when I thought that the usage of the Minions was funny and not too over the top with how they are portrayed today, which was definitely a blessing. Now, of course, the villain is just top tier, dude. Vector is still as relevant to today's society, and it's clear why. The orange jumpsuit, the bowl cut. This guy is your average Discord moderator. But in all seriousness, though, he was the cherry on top to a really well-made movie. Jason Segal gives a phenomenal voice acting performance for the character, and it makes him stand out in a movie with a bunch of great stuff already happening in it. Steve Carrell, of course, kills it as Gru in this movie, and it reminded me of a time when celebrities would actually try to change their voice for a voice acting role instead of just talking. Take me back to those days, man. Anyways, this movie really kicked off the franchise really well, and I mean, this movie's definitely S tier, so here's hoping the other movies can even come close to the genuine greatness this first film is. Now, Despicable Me 2 is a movie I saw one time in elementary school and then never remembered again. So going into this one after freshly coming off of the original was fun, but also quite scary, since my expectations were a bit high. And for the most part, this movie is pretty entertaining. I will say that its third act is what heavily weighs down the movie for me, because the first 2 acts were actually a lot of fun, and I thought it could have surpassed the original had it kept that kind of vibe going for it. This time, the story follows Gru as he works with the Anti-Villain League to help solve a case that they can't can't seem to crack. Along the way, Gru is also looking for a solid relationship partner so his girls can have a mother in the family. And like I mentioned before, the first 2 acts are really fun and I had a great time with it. Seeing Gru take on the spy persona and sneak around with Lucy was a lot of fun, bringing that whole Mission Impossible vibe to the franchise, which I found quite fun. The chemistry between Steve Carell's Gru and Kristen Wiig's Lucy was also really good too. Like the one scene where they sedate one of Gru's dates and take her back home. Just really fun stuff. And also his relationship with his girls this time is still the most wholesome part of the film for me. How he treats them with respect and the love they have for each other is actually so well done. It's also really cute seeing them try and hook Gru up with Lucy for like the first half of the movie. Now, the biggest criticisms I have with the film fall within the last act of it, and a major part of that is the villain. El Macho is introduced early on in the film because Gru recognizes him at the mall he's spying at, yet no one believes him because they all think he's dead. And for most of the film, El Macho is absent, and we barely get time to develop his character. Comparing him to Vector is like night and day, since Vector was introduced early on, had multiple scenes messing around with Gru, and his personality was put on full display within the first 20 minutes. With El Macho, however, he kind of just sits in the background until the ending needs a villain that Gru needs to stop, and he stops him so quickly, mind you, and it was just kind of a letdown. One of the things El Macho does is turn Gru's minions into these purple creatures, and holy shit, did the final act of this movie give me minion PTSD, because they were so goddamn annoying. I thought the first 2 acts barely used them and was shocked at that until I realized that they were going to make up the bulk of the finale, and I couldn't help but cringe, man. Like, why the hell are we doing minion covers of popular songs? Just use the original song, goddammit. My ears. And Dr. Nefario was barely in this, and I'd have liked to see more of him. But other than that, the movie is quite good all around. I was laughing at most jokes, and can we just take a second to see how many fat jokes they make towards Gru in this movie?
How come you're so fat?
So, do you work out?
Well,
I mean, obviously you don't.
Like, let my homie have a break. God damn. The animation is gorgeous and definitely upgraded since the first one. They must have gotten that increased budget and used it wisely. If I were to throw this one up on the tier list, I'd give it a B. Had the final act been stronger, I'd have maybe thrown it an A tier, but oh well. On to the next one. Fuck me. This is a movie of all time. It made $1 billion at the box office? Yeah, I'm gonna be completely honest with y'all here. I ain't got much to say on this movie. It's a really childish film that any ounce of nuance or subtle adult themes that the first 2 had definitely aren't going to be in here. And that's perfectly fine. I don't mean the movie is bad because there aren't adult themes, but if you know the kind of film you're going into, then you may have a quality time with this movie. For me, however, this film was like brain rot and fever dreams had a baby. One second I see minions killing a dinosaur, and the next I see Bob the Minion ruling all of England.
King Bob!
Okay, this was actually pretty funny. This movie is the type of film you put on in the background if you just want something on the TV. It's not something you actively pursue to watch, unless you're like me, and you want to torture yourself by watching 6 movies in a franchise for a video. Don't say I don't sacrifice my free time for you guys. I love you. Anyways, the animation is still excellent, no doubt there, and shockingly, John Hamm and Sandra Bullock give some crazy unhinged voice work as the villains in this film that actually made me laugh a couple of times. Maybe it was just because my final brain cells were trying hard to latch onto anything of substance here, but hey, it's not unwatchable by any means. I will say the minion language stuff starts to all blend together and you start to feel less and less inclined to understand what the hell is going on in this story. From my perspective, the story follows the main minions Kevin, Stuart, and Bob as they try and find new villains to work for, which is where they find Sandra Bullock's character, and from then on, it gets quite messy for me. As I mentioned before, Bob becomes the King of England at one point, and Kevin becomes Giant Man, and they run into a mini Gru at the end, which raises the question to how old Gru was supposed to be in the original Despicable Me, because if the original was in 2010, then Minions takes place in the early 70s, which makes Gru at least 7 in this film, making Gru almost 50 in the first movie? I don't know. I'm probably overthinking this. Anyways, this film is enjoyable if you slam like 10 green tea shots and put it on. Other than that, I don't think you guys really need to watch this one at all. I'd give this film a D tier. I don't think it's an absolute failure, but it ain't that great to me nonetheless. With the third movie in the trilogy came the least information about it, since I had forgotten a third Despicable Me movie even existed. However, after sitting through the third film, I can say I actually enjoyed this one a lot. Maybe it was because this one came right after the Minions movie, but I thought this movie had a lot of charm to it and a ton of enjoyable moments. This movie follows Gru as he continues working for the ABL with Lucy after the events of the second film. However, after a run-in with this film's main villain, Benjamin Bratt, he gets fired from the ABL and loses his job. But in a strange turn of events, Gru finds out he has a long-lost twin brother who is secretly raised by his father. They meet up, and Gru and his brother Drew find one last act of villainy against Bratt to make Drew a true criminal and get Gru his job back. And from here on out, the film has a bunch of fun antics and entertaining moments that kept me engaged from start to finish. Again, I thought this film was a ton of fun. The twin brother thing can feel quite contrived, but Steve Carrell is such a good voice actor that he brings so much life to Drew that it's impossible not to be entertained by both his voices. The two brothers have a ton of chemistry and they bounce jokes off each other really well too. It had me laughing quite a bit whether they would talk or just do goofy things during the main heist. As for the B plot though, it finds Lucy trying to become more acquainted with the daughters and become a motherly figure to them, which is a nice sentiment, but I will say the film doesn't linger on this issue enough for it to be truly as impactful as it should be. And it can seem that Lucy and the girls don't do much in this film except exist, so the audience knows these characters are still around. Like there's one part where Agnes tries to find a unicorn and another where Margot is forced to inadvertently get engaged to a random kid, and although the scenes are quite cute or funny, they could have been removed and the main story wouldn't have been affected at all. Speaking of not affecting the story, anything with the Minions this time around is as pointless as ever. Thankfully, they aren't in this movie as much as they were in the second, but they hold no weight in the overall story like at all. They straight up go on strike in the beginning of the film, only to get imprisoned, to break out and find their way back to Gru at the end of the film. They didn't even help in the main fight against Bratt. They were just straight up useless this time around. There is a cool dance number of them in prison though, I will give them that. They were kind of killing it. And one of the last things I'd give this movie that I thought was great was Benjamin Bratt as a villain. Compared to El Macho, he had way more screen time, and I got the essence of his character down real quick. He had a lot of funny scenes, had a cool aesthetic, and his action sequences were actually insane. Mad props to the animation team for this film as well. It genuinely looked insanely good this time around. So all in all, this was a shockingly good surprise in the franchise, and if I were to rank it on the tier list, I'd give it an A. Totally surprised by this, but hey, I'll take a hidden gem any day. The sequel to the first Minions movie being as good as it is actually quite shocking. Yeah, there's no need to build this one up because this movie is really entertaining and a ton of fun. I remember how hyped up this film got on social media 2 years back with all of the Minions memes, and my friends and I actually partook in this. This was the only other film of the franchise I saw in theaters because of the social media influence it was having at the time, and I'm glad I saw it because I liked it a lot then and I still like it a lot now. I feel like the filmmakers learned from the disaster of the first Minions movie that to make this sequel work, they really needed to focus not just on the Minions, but something more concrete. And giving that A plot to a young Groot who is working with his favorite villain was awesome. Steve Carrell is just a powerhouse in this role, and the voice he gives for Gru is so iconic and funny that it still doesn't get old no matter how many times he plays the role, young or old. This time around, he finds himself trying to impress the Vicious Six, a criminal organization looking to recruit a new member for the team, but when they dismiss him quickly, he takes it upon himself to steal their precious stone to prove them otherwise. However, one of the Minions, a new one named Otto, loses the stone, and the remaining 3 storylines are broken up into each part looking for them. Gru working with Wild Knuckles, Kevin, Stuart, and Bob racing to San Francisco to save Gru, and Otto tracking down the stone so he can get it to Gru. Each part had a lot of great moments to it, and I honestly enjoyed each one, especially with how they all got wrapped up in the end and how they all came together. For a movie titled Minions, it truly is a prequel Gru story first and foremost. I like how this film added a lot of layers to a younger Gru we only get a hint at in the original trilogy. Also, learning a few skills from his mentor makes sense as to how acclaimed he is by the first movie's timeline. And as for the Minions, I genuinely didn't hate them in this. I'll be honest, I thought they were quite funny too. The original trio from the first go searching for Gru, and there are a lot of funny moments they share. One of the standouts for me was when they flew a plane to San Francisco and Kevin just kept making sharp downturns. This shit had me dying. The movie does physical comedy really well. They also learned kung fu from a mysterious woman named Master Chow, and she was great too. A lot of the random side characters are fun and entertaining to watch, just like the Vicious Six, each layered with their own abilities, and that not only makes them stand out, and it gives the audience a few laughs as well. The final battle is also beautifully animated and has some really great action scenes. Obviously, these movies don't give crazy layers to every character, but I don't think it needs that. This film sets out to be a fun and entertaining one that has great comedic bits that everyone can enjoy, and it does just that. With entertaining action, great voice acting, and beautiful animation, this film truly is one of the best in the franchise, in my honest opinion. And I'm not afraid to put it right next to the original in terms of quality and my enjoyment. It's a great film with a lot of nostalgic moments, and I was cracking up when they showed the Vector cameo. Oh boy. We've reached the latest entry into the franchise. 7 years after the latest installment and 2 years after Minions 2, I went into this one curious to see if it could even capture the same energy as other films in the franchise. And well, yeah, this one is the worst one of the four by far. She sucks, he sucks, half this movie is just nonsense, man. I guess this movie is supposed to be some sort of conclusion based off of how the last 5 minutes goes by, but like, wow, is this not the way I would have liked to see the franchise end? My biggest criticism with this film is how it all feels like individual short films cobbled together to form some sort of story, and then it was just thrown in theaters. It suffers the same problem that Kung Fu Panda had in that the story doesn't really feel organic. The main catalyst of the story is that the new big bad, Maxime Le Mal, portrayed by Will Ferrell, is breaking out of prison, so the entire AVL decide that Gru and his family need to relocate and get new identities? But like, they didn't have to do this with Brat in the third one, and he's a much more threatening villain who's literally mentally insane. It just felt weird, and then once they move, characters like Dr. Nefario are gone for the entire film, and Gru's brother Drew, who they ended on an awesome note with by having Gru chase down his brother while he does crimes, is nowhere to be found in this film. Instead, we get introduced to Poppy, an annoying preteen girl who forces Gru to go on a heist for the story to move forward. She does nothing but shit on him for half the film, and disrespects him, so obviously I'm not going to take her very seriously. And in my opinion, I think it should have been one of Gru's own girls who forces him on a heist or something of that nature. Bring more attention to the literal girls who started this franchise to begin with. Like, why are you introducing new characters now? It would have been a cool father-daughter bonding moment to cap off the franchise. And I think it would have been great if it was Edith to do so. Since she's already the most action-oriented, lying-prone girl of the family, this would have hit so much harder because in the actual film, the girls and Lucy do literally nothing. If you think they did nothing in the third movie, then they do 10 times less in this one and are basically background characters in the entire film. And that's such a shame. I feel like all of these characters have been reduced since the second one drastically. The minions get upgrades from the AVL and become these superheroes. Don't worry though, they do nothing either, and they don't even help in the final battle against them all. Speaking of them all, the character is played by freaking Will Ferrell, and he's not in this film at all, and isn't compelling in the slightest. His crux against Gru is that he took his song at the talent show in freshman year of high school, and since then, he's devoted to being his arch nemesis. Like, bro, go outside. This type of motivation is just as bad as Mysterio's and Far From Home. This film is just boring and doesn't do anything new or interesting, and it's just a shame because going from Minions 2 to this was a vibe killer. If I were to place this one on the tier list, I'd give it a C. It's not the most heinous film to watch, and it gets brownie points for at least being intelligible compared to the first Minions movie. But other than that, I wouldn't watch it again. I will say, seeing a Vector cameo appearance at the end of this movie gave me life. One thing I wanted to do before I wrap up the video was rank my favorite villains from least favorite to favorite. So without further ado, in 6th we have Maxime Le Mal, El Macho, Scarlet and Herb Overkill, Benjamin Bratt, The Vicious Six, and of course, Vector. Dude remains unbeaten, just like the movie he's a part of. At the end of the day, whatever movie you like the most is completely up to you. But it remains a staple why the first film is my favorite and a lot of other people's favorites as well. It has this amazing balance of comedic moments, great action scenes, but heartfelt moments too, that grounded and make the film feel more authentic, that other films in the franchise can't seem to get right anymore. And it's a shame, because Illumination really knocked it out of the park with their first entry. So in conclusion, it seems that the Despicable Me franchise isn't all terrible, and rewatching all of these films made me realize how many I genuinely found enjoyable. However, the highs of the first film are damn near impossible to reach, with the only one coming close to it being Minions 2. So what do you all think? Let me know down in the comments comments below. I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts on this. Please hit that like button and subscribe while you're at it. YouTube likes when you do that because it'll share this post out to more people, and that'll make me really happy. That's all I have for today, guys. I'll see you all in another video very soon. Peace out.